far-flung activities of the Department of Justice in controlling crime are not limited to the apprehension and conviction of the criminal. It also protects the public through its vast prison system, which spans the length and breadth of the United States. 21 institutions of widely differing types house the some 16,000 federal prisoners. Grim Alcatraz, an island in San Francisco Bay, houses about 300 desperados who cannot safely be trusted in other prisons. Swift running tides and rugged cliffs make every man in Alcatraz realize that he can get away only when permitted to leave by the front gate at the end of his sentence. Alcatraz is the Spanish name for the waterfowl, which formerly lived in huge numbers on its island cliffs. Vigilant guards also protect the public by preventing the escape of these desperate criminals until they've shown such unmistakable evidence of an improvement in attitude that they may be safely transferred to some other federal penal institution. But most federal prisoners are not so bad that they must be sent to this island prison. Leavenworth, originally a small frontier prison, now has grown to an institution housing upwards of 3,200 men. Another federal penitentiary is located at Atlanta, Georgia. No one has escaped from inside its walls in almost 20 years. The latest and most modern federal prison at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, is used also to incarcerate those who violate the ever-growing number of federal statutes. The watchword of this institution, emblazoned on one of its arches, reads, "That which is past and gone is irrevocable. Wise men have enough to do with things present and to come." This wise saying of Sir Francis Bacon epitomizes the objectives of the federal prison program, which is always striving to send men out of prison better and not worse than when they were received. Only by so doing can prisons protect the public against future criminals. Federal crime has been increasing in recent years, largely because of the enactment of new laws. In 1910, there were only 2,075 federal prisoners, 98% of whom had been sentenced for such crimes as counterfeiting, mail robbery, and homicide on government reservations. Notice that by 1925, more than half of the men and women in federal prisons were guilty of offenses against new laws, such as interstate shipment of stolen automobiles, the use of drugs, white slavery, and liquor law violations. In 1935, there were 7 times as many federal prisoners as in 1910, and more than half of them convicted for offenses that were not federal crimes 25 years ago. Overcrowding has resulted, of course, both in federal and state prisons. Here is a view of 5,500 prisoners in one western state institution. How can there be any study of the individual prisoner or constructive treatment of his problems when so many are crowded in a single institution? Reformatories for young first offenders, such as this one at Chillicothe, Ohio, form a part of an integrated federal penal system. Federal prisoners are first classified according to their age, character, and type of offense committed. Then they are sent to the kind of institution which will be most helpful in the individual case. Thus, the federal government is protecting the public by doing something to rehabilitate and reform the law violator who must someday return to the community. At this reformatory, the inmates are almost entirely young first offenders. It is hard for the incoming prisoner to fool these alert prison officials, and if his fingerprints show that he is a confirmed criminal, the government will not waste money on him at Chillicothe. An important part of the protective process is to rid the prisoner of disease, which might otherwise become a community menace, and then build him up physically. This removes any excuse for future criminal tendencies arising from mental or bodily infirmity. As soon as the prisoner has been identified and examined and a social case history prepared, he goes before the classification committee, where his case is discussed. These experienced officers study the reports of his home conditions, his school record, the views of the court and the probation officer, and decide just what he needs most. Everyone knows that men often commit crimes because they have not fitted themselves to be self-reliant or engage in law-abiding pursuits. So the federal government teaches its wards by sending them to school. And it also shows them that good sportsmanship really means a healthy regard for the rights and property of others. Hard, honest work is usually the most potent force in the reformation and rehabilitation of the prisoner. He must learn a respectable trade or vocation and be taught to earn his bread by the sweat of his brow. Scientific farming teaches men from rural communities that the old farm can be made to pay without resorting to the law-breaking activities of turning their corn into moonshine. City boys who wish to learn trades get their lessons on actual construction. To teach the prisoner real habits of industry so he will be able to keep pace with his fellow men when he leaves prison, he must have a hand in the production of useful articles and commodities. The inmates of federal institutions are employed to make only goods used by the government itself. No goods made in federal prisons are sold to the public. Articles such as canvas for mail bags, shoes for government wards, and the like. Constant vigilance is the price of institutional safety. Metal detectors expose any attempt to smuggle guns, knives, or weapons into the institution. A light flashes when a man has a piece of metal concealed upon his person. What's wrong here? The detector has discovered something. It's just a can of tobacco, but it's best to know about it and look it over carefully. We can pass him now, but it is hopeless to try to sneak anything past this electric eye. Equal consideration of all federal prisoners is an essential part of its program. Whether it is a question of parole or discipline, his case is heard and given individual treatment. It is hard for a federal prisoner to rate parole. He must not only be legally eligible and have an exemplary prison record, but he must also show the Board of Parole that his home situation is proper, that he has or can obtain a job, and that reputable citizens, not the old gang, will advise and assist him. Parole is never a method of shortening the sentence or an easy way out. Paroled men sometimes fail, but the actual number of federal prisoners who violate their trust is relatively small. In 1935, a total of 8,498 federal prisoners were discharged. Of these, 2,451 were paroled. A careful check of all parolees is made by federal probation and parole officers to see that they do not violate the promises they have made. This accounts for the fact that during 1935, only 263 prisoners were found to be violators of their promises. Most violations were not flagrant, were such as failure to report regularly, associating with bad characters, refusing to work, or drinking to excess. If the prisoner is not paroled, he must nevertheless someday be released. Readjusting the ex-convict is always an exceedingly difficult problem, but if the parole system is wisely and courageously administered, and sufficient funds are available to investigate each case carefully and adequately supervise the released prisoner, who can question that the community is best protected when the prisoner goes out conditionally rather than scot-free? Thus it is that the federal prison system protects the public. Life in a federal prison is not one of ease and comfort. If a man wants to be hard-boiled, there's a place for him. If, on the other hand, he earns the privilege of going to school, learning a trade, or release on parole, he will receive his fair deserts. After all, the prison is a place of discipline and deprivation. The loss of liberty is the consequence of crime. The trail of years, however, need not be entirely dead. They can open a vista of hope and promise beyond the present. The aim of federal prison administration is to look beyond the immediate situation and to protect your community and future generations from unreformed criminals.